Hello, listeners, and those of you watching on YouTube. Welcome to Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design. You're joining Philippa Scott and Philippa Cox, otherwise known as Pippa. Remember, we're keeping it. Pippa is Pippa Cox and Philippa is Philippa Scott. Now, we have with us today the beautiful Prudence Todd, who has for a very long time called me Pippa, and so this is going to be a super big challenge for her. So I've given you a bit of a rundown of who Prudence is in the bio read at the beginning, but Prue, would you please share with us a bit of your story? Who is Prudence Todd?
Oh, thank you. So nice to be with both you, Philippa and Pippa today. Thank you for inviting me. So yes, I'm Prudence Todd. I'm the founder of Your Womanhood. I have a clinic here on the Sunshine Coast where I see women for holistic pelvic wellness. And I also work with women online, really determining where they feel broken in their lives after childbirth, how they want to heal that, whether that's emotionally or physically in their bodies. And I live on the Sunshine Coast as well, and I only just recently met Pippa and a few years ago met Philippa. So it's really nice to be with both of you. And I know our backgrounds are so like interwoven in our experience to be able to come together and actually talk a little bit about this today is really, really special. I'm a mum to 4 kids, 2 grown adult children, a daughter and a son, and then 2 teenage boys who are 15 and 13, and have been with my mate for 26 years. We've, had our challenges. I've been through some pretty intense depression raising children, and that took me out of my career being a midwife and a registered nurse because I lost my registration during that time. I just couldn't maintain the workload in the workforce. And so after having 4 kids and birthing over 9 and 10-pound babies, my body was pretty ragged. My back kept bombing out on me. I would not be able to walk for 2 weeks at a time sometimes. I had pubic symphysis pain. I got into Pilates and I started doing that for myself. And someone was like, "You're pretty good at that." One of the instructors said, "You should become an instructor." So when I had decided that it wasn't worth it to me to go back and do my uni degree again, all over again, which is what they told me I would need to do to stay be a registered midwife again, I was like, oh, maybe I could become a Pilates instructor. And so I entered into that for myself and to do something while the kids were younger. And then I started to notice things in women's bodies in my classes. So I was teaching, 10 to 12 classes a week. Occasionally I'd end up at the odd birth here and there if the universe aligned and somebody needed me. But what was really apparent to me, whether it's because I had that background and I'd been with women during birth, is that women were noticing things through their pelvic floor in class. And at the same time, my body was saying, oh, you need to quieten your classes down. And so I listened to that after a lot of resistance and ended up doing more training through holistic pelvic care, both with Temi Kent, she's from the States, and also Jenny Blythe and Fiona Hallinan from Victoria. And now this is what I do. I just needed someone to just be like, go do this. And Fiona Hallinan was the one that I had a conversation with here in Australia. And she was like, women need this. So I opened my clinic and I do that online. And it's very, very special to be able to walk that journey with women after having babies. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Prue. Sorry, I call you Prue. I know you're going back to Prudence, so we've both had this name shift over our time that we've known each other, which is a challenge.
Something happens in perimenopause or something. I don't know.
Maybe that is what happens. We're definitely in alignment in so many of our spaces. You and I both have 4 children. We're both similar age. We've both been with our partners for a similar period of time, and it's there's a lot of alignment there in terms of all of that. In fact, Pippa, I went to Prue's house the other day and met her son who'd gone to school with my daughter. So her second born and my second born were actually at high school together, and had known each other well before Prue and I ever met. So that was really
that's awesome. Talk about the 6 degrees of separation. That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great.
And you know,
And for, yeah,
the funniest thing that happened before that was I always tell my sons if someone's coming, because my clinic's at my house and I have teenage sons. So they're aware of the work that I do. And I like to let them know that there's a woman in the house. And he was like, "Oh, do I know this person?" I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure." He's like, "Well, do I need to meet her?" And you walked in the front door and he's like there. And you both, like, you had your story about how your daughter knew him. And I was like, oh, of all the people, it's hilarious.
love it, love it.
Yeah. Okay, so Prue, the I guess one of the things that we are all about on this podcast is about exploring not just the physical side of pregnancy, birth, and parenting, but the emotional and spiritual side of that. So how do these physical experiences we have impact us emotionally? How do they impact us spiritually? How do they impact various areas of our life? And so I'm going to let you run wild here with this, because this is your jam. But when pelvic floor stuff happens, it doesn't just impact our body. For me, I had a Caesar for my first baby, and so my pelvic floor was only impacted by the weight of the baby. And so, I didn't actually have any stress on my pelvic floor in terms of childbirth. When I had my second baby, though, I pushed for an hour on a birthing stool, had a second-degree tear and a big bleed. And that second-degree tear also meant hemorrhoids. It meant, difficulty with sex and fear of sex initially going back. So there was all these sorts of things that happened for me. And look, I was lucky. Well, I did a lot of work. Third baby, much, she was a bigger baby, but I had no tearing with her at all. And so that was very. I did a lot of work prenatally as well as during the pregnancy, and then during the birth, to make sure that didn't happen. But and I didn't know about the 3Ps back then. I'll share with you the 3Ps later. The 3Ps got my daughter through a 9 pound 7 baby with no tears. But that impacts us on a emotional level. So those are the things I experience, but I imagine you see lots of different experiences for women. Can you give us some of the outcomes women face emotionally from having pelvic floor issues from childbirth?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk to this generally about the women that I've seen and the women that I've worked with and what I see in their bodies. I think it's really important to also acknowledge that it's so unique and the impact is so unique for each and every person. For one person who goes through some kind of pelvic floor trauma or difficulty or bruising or changes or whatever that is, it can mean a completely different thing for that woman to what, something very mild to another woman might be. And you would know this through, the emotional impact of birth trauma, but it's the same in the physical impact. Some women can have quite an extensive tear and it will heal really quite miraculously well. And other women can have a minor, little graze and their organs shift place. And, then they're like in this quandary of my body doesn't feel the same. There can be this huge emotional impact for them. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that birth impacts all of us differently. For instance, my experience, I didn't have any tearing. I birthed over 9 and 10 pound babies. One of them was 10 pound and posterior. Two of them were 9 pound or 10 pound and born with their hands on their head. Like, they were complex babies to, birth out of my body. And I didn't have any pelvic floor damage, but I struggled immensely with back pain. I had huge tummy separation from carrying these babies in my body. And when I finally went and got this investigated, the scans that they did on my pelvis showed that I had like ligaments that looked so ragged. They said it was like a professional AFL player. So, the context of how birth impacts our bodies is different for every single woman. And like you say, it's not just the physical impact, it's the emotional impact of how do we deal with that once we're experiencing that. So no matter what it is, whether it's a little tear or whether it's quite a difficult episiotomy that's like now scarring, or it's healed well but it's got irritation in it, how does that impact our relationship with our partner? Or how does that impact the way that we go to the toilet? How does that impact the way we enjoy sex? There's so many different elements. But then on top of that is, when these things have happened to our body, even if we've had, vaginal birth or cesarean birth, how do we view ourselves as within that experience, as a woman in that experience? And what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? What's the dialogue that we're having with ourselves about that experience? And so then that's around the actual birth, but then the roll-on effect of that, is that impacting the way I connect with my child because I'm so, in my body around pain? Or is that impacting my relationship with my partner to the point where we don't even enjoy sexual intimacy for some women really long periods of time, or even for some men where they're so afraid to actually approach their partner because they're just horrified at what their partner's had to go through. I don't actually work with the men very often, but I know that my husband, he works in the mines, and he's a very safe space for men and women to talk about all the kind of deep things that we go through as family. And he will often have conversations with men about, the impact for them around what's happened to their woman's body. How does that impact our connection over a long period of time? And then how do we see ourselves based on what's happened in our relationship with our partner? And so this can be really debilitating for women, and in saying that, I can work with a woman straight after birth. But I can also work with a woman in her 60s and 70s who's never, ever connected that what she's experiencing in her body is related to something that happened years and years and years ago from her births, or perhaps even a miscarriage that she had, or a stillbirth that she had, and how she's never processed that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really quite interesting, Prue, in my experience, because I've also done a lot of work with sexuality and with rape victims as well. And there is a lot of trauma that we actually have inside of us there that impacts us on so many different levels.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about that? And what are your experiences with that? And how does it actually not only impact women in that respect, but what can we actually do to help prevent it? And particularly you've been doing Pilates for so long. How can we prevent that antenatally before we even get pregnant? How can we get our bodies in peak condition?
Yeah. A story comes to mind of an older woman that I worked with overseas online. She was living overseas. And during our first session together, she told me a story about an incident that she'd been through as a teenager that she had never told anyone in her entire life, that impacted her sexual being. And, I don't think that we acknowledge enough the way that we relate to ourselves as women and how that impacts the way we birth. And so I think to answer your question, irrespective of any exercise that we could do, I'm so deeply passionate about understanding these things within our own body so that we can teach young women about how they relate to themselves. And, a story comes to mind of my daughter. She was about to leave to go to schoolies, and she had her best friend here, and they were packing the car, and I just made a little cup of tea and took a cup of tea out to both of them. It was her closest friend at the time. And I said, I know you're going around schoolies, don't know where you're at with the whole sex thing, but, let's just sit down, have a chat. And her friend at the time was, and I said to her, I don't know, Phoebe, whether you want to have this. I know that she won't mind me talking about this. I know that your mates here, and if you're open, I can have the conversation with both of you. And her friend was just like, yes, I never get to have these conversations. Let's talk about that. And so we did. I think really having the conversations that helps a woman to have the conversations I think women need to talk more about what they experience in their lives and have safe places to talk about what they experience in pelvic floor issues as well, even before they have babies.
Yeah.
What is that weird pain that I feel in my rectum that just comes and stays for a few moments and then disappears? Why am I feeling this stabbing pain in my vagina? Like, a doctor isn't always the place that you feel comfortable to go and talk about that stuff. And when we can start to learn how to be with the sensation in our body, we don't need to have to be around the diagnosis of the sensation in our body, if that makes sense. So it's the same when we were preparing for birth. It's like, you know, when you learn to trust your body through being able to be with sensation in your body, you can go places that you can't by having all the knowledge up here.
Yeah.
I remember birthing my fourth baby, fastest birth out of all of them. Really, if someone were to look at that, it would look like the best birth. He was born in 2 hours. But I remember struggling in myself, remembering women, you know, Russian women. Obviously, there wasn't many videos back at that time, but I'd watched a video or something of the Russian women. They roll themselves in the snow and they birth, you know, babies that had like cameras around glass baths and stuff, and they were just so serene. And I remember him coming through so powerfully in my body, and my body just being like, oh my gosh, I just want to be serene. I want to be like those women. I want to be. And I just remember my body going, Prue, stop. You need to stop being in your head around all of the things that you want this to be and actually get what's happening here. And at that time, I realized my cervix was just like, it's happening too fast and I want it to slow down. That's what my head and my body wanted. But I just needed to surrender. And I just let all of that go. And it was like, he was here perfectly, 10 pound.
I have a bit of a theory. I think, and well, it just makes sense to me. So it's my theory. But I think that if we have, I want to call them dodgy experiences around first menarche, you know, around that first period, if that's treated with shame or not talked about at all, or, you know, maybe just dismissed, or, you know, I meet so many women whose, you know, whose auntie, you know, gave them their first, you know, pack or something, like just not having any openness around that. And then women who've had sexual assault, or women who've had poor sexual experiences early on, and then women's experiences of birth, if they're traumatic or disappointing or not empowering in some way. I actually feel like each and every one of those, it's kind of like you know, a train would just add another carriage, right? And it just has more and more momentum. And then they get to menopause, and it's like the freight train hits them in the head, right? It's like bang. All of a sudden, they experience all of the symptoms really hard.
Yeah.
Every part of that is more traumatic for them because they're so out of sync with their body, because every experience involving their menstruation or their sexuality essentially has been in some way tarnished or bruised or violated. And now they're going through this exiting phase of that, and there's a disconnect and a fight within the body and the mind over this experience, because it's never been welcome, and it's never been amazing, and it's never been fulfilling. And so there's this real, and they experience it so harshly, and it's such a big thing. And I'm so glad we're talking about it more, you know, just how hard menopause and perimenopause can be for women. But I really believe that a lot of it comes back to prior trauma. And when we can deal with that stuff, then the experience can be better for menopause as well. And like you, I work with women who, you know, decades after their trauma, they're coming to finally heal. But my favorite client is the client who comes before she's pregnant or before she gives birth to her very first baby. because when we can heal it before, it doesn't actually matter what happens in that experience. It doesn't stay in the body as trauma. It doesn't actually stick around in the unconscious as trauma. It's like, because you can send twins to war, right? And one will come back with PTSD and one won't, right? Genetically the same, but their experiences of life will be different. So their balloon, one might have a full balloon of all these little T or big T traumas, and the other one won't. And so the one with lots of stuff in their balloon will come back with trauma, and the one who didn't will come back with no PTSD, right? So, and that's the difference, is how full is your balloon. So when we can empty a balloon before childbirth, before those things, that's when we can really, no matter what happens and how it unfolds, we're not experiencing trauma in that space. Or if we do, we're not carrying it on with us. And that's really cool. And that's what you're talking about there, is it's all of those experiences building up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how many times I have, whether I'm working with a woman online and she might, start to link the pelvic pain with the endometriosis that she's experienced, or the pelvic pain that she's been feeling, or the painful sex that she's been enduring, which many, many women just endure painful sex. It's amazes me how many women will either just not have it at all, or they will just endure because they want to be close to their partner, or they just feel like that's what they need to do. And they link that to something that happened in their life. And then they'll be like, oh, I can see that when that particular thing happened in my life, that's when the endo showed up, or that's when the pelvic pain showed up. And, I often relate it to, when a best friend rocks up to your house or you connect and they're just carrying like a real heaviness in their body and they just want a hug, they need that support, and you hold them and that heaviness just dissolves and they're just like, they just soften in your arms. And this is what the pelvic floor is like. The pelvic floor carries the burden of our experiences. It is at the base of our torso, physically, emotionally, and it holds this. And also, I think even in pregnancy, preparing for childbirth, but also mothering and being pregnant and preparing for childbirth and like going on, and then even after that and growing our lives and developing our careers, we are so doing in our day-to-day and not being, that our pelvic floor doesn't get the movement and the expansion and the rest and the contraction that she needs to be fully functional. So physically, we need to know how to allow her to breathe. I mean, she's part of, about 6 different diaphragms in our body. We've got slings in our feet, slings in our pelvis, the diaphragm underneath our rib cage, and then in our head. And they all move the pressures through our body. And when we're not breathing very deeply, this is happening. And then we get a little bit of stress, like we're carrying a baby, or we've been through some kind of emotional trauma or sexual trauma, or we've endured, painful periods a lot. We've got pain in the body a lot. The diaphragm starts to, like, that impacts our breathing. She's carrying this rigidity. Perhaps we've then gone through something in birth. We may have scarring there. We've got cesarean section scars that also connect into the pelvis. She just needs to be held physically and emotionally and become soft again. We can't do a bicep curl with a muscle that's like fully rigid and just in a constant state of flexion. If we want to truly build this as a muscle, we have to learn to fully let go and contract. And when it's in that state of flight or fright, freeze mode, tension, stress, pain, it just doesn't move very well, doesn't function very well. And then that feeds into our hips, our shoulders. The fascia is connected to everywhere. So really being able to either, one-on-one with a practitioner, if there's someone in your area, or online with someone that you trust, being able to allow the tissues through being able to speak about your experiences, and then being able to learn different techniques to actually allow the pelvic floor to soften, can actually be the portal to so much medicine in the body. for a woman. Mm.
That's amazing.
Love that, Prue. Love that. It's absolutely relevant. Particularly, I loved what you were talking about with the different diaphragms and the dance that they have throughout our body.
Mm.
And the fact that in today's world we're living in a total state of tension. We don't realize it because, as you said, we're doing, we're not being, we're rush, rush, rush.
Yeah,
A lot of us are
absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
And the fascia, I find the fascia fascinating. And the
Fascinating fascia.
more I get into it, the more I just think, why don't we know more about this incredible organ? It's actually known now as an organ in so many different texts.
Yeah, and it's like connected, it connects everything to everything and is as sensitive as
Yeah,
our skin, you know, it
it
holds the
is.
emotional memories and
Yeah. And
yeah.
the energetics, the meridian lines go through the fascia as well. And I love the fact that with the fascia, when we're all tense, it's like a bunch of spaghetti. But as I'm sure you know, because you're Pilates and you know you're with your knowledge through Pilates, when we're moving really well, it's like those covers that you get in duty free with the alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where the energy and the relaxation and where it can all flow and be nurtured and just be loved.
Mm. Yeah, I've in the last 18 months or 3 years ago, I started doing my own fascia release body movement. And I still teach women exercises to release and to create tone. I don't believe we can create tone through the pelvic floor if we haven't first released the tension. But the fascia maneuvers is such a big part of what I do now because I think it becomes too concentrated. That's where Kegels, I think, are just not they're just not a thing that I teach. It's not a thing that I recommend because it's too concentrated on the pelvic floor. It forgets so much, and we can actually access the pelvic floor. You know, when you go to do a pelvic floor exercise, it's pretty hard. You know, you've got to be pretty mindful. You've got to slow down. It's why women find it so difficult to actually heal this part of themselves because it requires a lot of presence and stillness and focus and concentration, and it's frustrating. You kind of feel sick inside because you don't know whether you're connecting or not. And so to be able to like bring that out a little bit to the bigger picture and like let's move our whole body and use the breath to allow the pelvic floor to breathe and heal issues within the pelvic floor with our whole body and our heart just is so much more peaceful and beautiful, I think.
You hit it on the head there too, Prudence, because I've had this conversation with Prue a few times and we've known each other a few years, and I said to her right at the beginning, I don't have time to fix my pelvic floor. I'm scared of how much effort I'm going to have to go to and how much I'm going to have to put in here in order to do the work to heal that space. But I recently got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm really heading into this perimenopause stage. I really know that all of this stuff is going to impact me more and more and more. And I called Pro. I'm like, right, it's time. I'm coming. And so I went and had my first session with Prue this week, and it was beautiful. I love a good yoni steaming, which was like, but Prue said, how was that when I got back? And I said, 10 minutes is a really long time to just sit there, right? Because I'm one of those, you know, I've got this ADHD brain going on here. So I'm always on the go, and finding that space and time to just stop, sit, and be with my body. And I signed up a few months ago to do some breathwork facilitation courses and so on. So I've been working through that stuff and just even working with the breath on that side, coming back and then doing some stuff around my pelvic floor and having the skills there has been amazing just in terms of me. And I left the house and I said to my kids, I'm going out. And they said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go do something for me. And
Yeah.
they looked at me like, what? yeah, I'm not getting my toes done or getting my nails done, none of that. I'm going to do something for me. And, so often, and I actually did a video on this yesterday, or the day before, about the fact that we often don't do the real work that we need to do for ourselves. We often don't do the self-care that really matters, because it does take time and it does take commitment, and it is it's consuming, and we often feel like we don't have much left to give in order to do our own stuff. But the fact of the matter is, we have to. If we are an empty cup, we cannot fill anyone else's, no matter how much we think we do. And I sat with a dad on Wednesday afternoon, and he said, everything in my house revolves around my wife's emotions. Everything. Whether she's okay or not okay, we are all impacted. I said, yeah, but she thinks she's just managing you all. She doesn't know. She doesn't even know that her stuff, everybody's feeling. So we have to do this work, and you have to be ready for it, because it does require you to put the effort and the time in. But it is so important that we do it. That podcast that I recorded at 4:45 this morning for a woman in California, she said to me, "What's your one piece of advice that you would give to someone?" I said, "Do the work." Do the emotional work, do the mental work to make sure you're okay. Just do the work. Put some money into it. Do the work. It's important.
Absolutely. And I think that fundamentally, my belief is that under all pelvic floor issues is something for us to discover about ourselves. It's our body actually calling us home to a wisdom that we haven't yet discovered. And, I remember a woman that I was with for a home birth a long time ago. She was a high school friend, and I was with her for both her home births. And she said to me after one of them, "Thank you for not making birth all just a big romantic idea." And when I work with women now in birth prep around pelvic floor, it's, we can't control what's going to happen. It's just like life. And if you're going to get me on your podcast, you're going to get the real deal. And I feel the same about birth. We don't know what's going to happen in life. We try our best to be prepared, but we don't know what's going to happen. So what are you going to do if your birth doesn't go the way that you thought? What are you going to do if your body starts to show symptoms that you just never anticipated? Women can be cruising along. I have women that come to see me and they're like, I've been great for so long, and now all of a sudden my body's just not right down there anymore. It's like, I don't want to have to think about what's going on down there. And I just lovingly lean across and look at them. I'm like, I know you don't want to have to think about it, but your body's asking you to think about it for a very good reason. And not only are you going to learn so much about it, but you're going to change the whole way you feel about it. And now when she speaks to you, you're going to be like, yeah, I hear. It's going to be like a best friend speaking to you. You're going to want to hold her. You're going to want to do that. And so what I've found with women, that sometimes, they've done all the preparation for birth, and perhaps birth hasn't gone the way they wanted it. Perhaps they sustained a tear that they didn't imagine. They have the physical tear in their body, but they have a deep emotional resource to help them heal now. I don't know if that makes sense for you, but it's like we can have the physical impact on our body and not know what the heck to do when that happens. But then we can also go through experiences where it's like, oh my goodness, this has happened, but I feel resourced in myself to deal with this. I know to womb steam. I know to do this. I know to do that. I know that this is now going to be a vulnerability. Honoring vulnerabilities in our body, particularly around our pelvic floor. Like when you start to realize that, okay, my pelvis is maybe a little bit permanently in a bit of a twist, or my tailbone goes off to one side, or I have a lot of tension on the right, and you understand that as your baby moves through and you're birthing, that you've got some vulnerability there. You're going to listen to your body when your body goes, I need you to get into this position. If you're oblivious to those things, you're going to be like, oh, what's my body like? Oh, I don't really feel like it. Philippa, when you now understand what's going on in your body, in your pelvic floor, and she speaks to you, you're going to be like, yeah, I know. I'm just speaking it into fruition here. And because you have a deeper understanding, but you also have a deeper loving connection We
Mm.
honor the people and the relationships and the connections in our life that we truly value. And when we truly value a relationship with ourselves as women and what our woman body has been through, we listen more deeply to those symptoms when they speak to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I did say that I'm going to ask you in a minute to give our listeners one thing you'd like them to take as a takeaway, and then share with us how they can get in touch with you. But I promised at the beginning I'd share the 3 Ps.
Gotcha.
So if you've got kids in the car, you can put their fingers in their ears now. But the 3 Ps that worked for, so I discovered this during my eldest daughter's pregnancy. So it hasn't been a really long time, but it was just so funny and it's so pertinent. So the 3 Ps are when you start to get to that stage of labor where the baby is descending and coming out. So that expulsion stage, I call it the pushing stage, but I don't remember pushing very much with either of my home births. They just kind of came, and I breathed them down as opposed to pushing them down. But anyway, through that, the 3 Ps are patience protects the pussy. So we go slow, but even just Pippa's laughing at me, but even just when I said that to her, and I said to her, remember, because she's, that all that stinging is right there, right? It's just right there. And she said, you could see the look on her face was just wanting that to be over. And I said, remember your 3 Ps. And she got this smile on her face. She had this internal giggle, and she just went, slow down, Alana, slow down. And she said that to herself, and she knew that that's what she needed to do in that moment. And it's a little bit funny. Guys like to, they remember it so they can remind their partner. But, a lot of times we need to have patience with that area of our body, and we forget to have patience with that area. So, that's my funny takeaway.
And that's
for
beautiful.
Today.
Love that, love that, love that. That's awesome. And can I just say that I'm so glad men love that, because guess what else it's really good for? The actual physical act of sex. Patience protects the pussy.
Absolutely.
That beautiful thing called foreplay that actually starts with coming home in the evening and going, "Hi, how was your day, dear?"
Absolutely. And even the
That is
laughing,
foreplay.
creating that oxytocin and just allowing the body.
Laughing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love it. Oh, Prue, what a fantastic work you do. I am so enthralled with your knowledge and your expertise and what you're bringing to the world.
Thank you,
It's
darling
awesome.
Pippa.
My heart goes out to you. I reckon you have such value to give to the world. It's beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Looking forward to cultivating our relationship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon you've got some really incredible experience and stories in and around what you've seen in the world and seen in women's bodies, and when women do or don't have education in and around how to take care of themselves, how that impacts the outcome. And I'd love to talk more about that one day.
Yeah. But Pippa, you're going to ask some amazing questions with prudence, I should say, with prudence, about the takeaways and everything.
Yes.
So I'll hand it over to you, my dear.
So, Prue, what would be the one takeaway you'd want people to remember from this?
The one. I've only got one. It would be let go in your belly. Just let your belly go. I could sit here and talk about all the emotional, things that we've entwined in our conversation today, but we hold our bellies in habitually as women, and this pulls on our pelvic floor. It pulls up through the vault of our vagina. It creates unnecessary tension. It disturbs the process of going to the toilet. It doesn't enable our digestion to expand. It just causes so much unnecessary restriction, and yet it is so ingrained in us to pull our bellies in. And it's not even something we even think about. I mean, I teach this all the time. I think there's multiple times a day that I let my belly go because I'm consciously aware of it. And so times where I think this one thing is so helpful is when you go to the loo, sit on the loo and just let your belly go. Take a deep breath before you do a pee. Just, don't push it out. Just let it out. Let your belly go when you're doing a poop. Like sometimes we're like, oh, I just don't know why it's not coming out. Well, if you actually let your belly go, you've got more expansion. There's more contraction there to be able to actually help with the poop. That's really helpful when having babies too. Before you sit and eat a meal, just close your eyes and let your belly go. Allow your digestive system to relax so that the food's actually coming in onto a relaxed body, a relaxed pelvic floor. And when you're in the shower, just let your belly go. Just give her a little rub and let her be in her full expansion instead of like contracted. That would be my one advice.
Beautiful. I'm sitting
Love
here
it.
letting my belly go and
Love it.
now needing to go to the toilet. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we're all doing that.
So thank you so much, Prue. Can you tell people where they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Facebook as Prudence Todd, and I also have an Instagram page called Reclaim Your Womanhood. So you can contact me through Instagram. You can contact me through Messenger on Facebook. Either of those, I will more than happily jump in there and reply to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Prudence. We appreciate you coming on and sharing all your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been beautiful. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. And folks, please remember to subscribe, follow, like, share the podcast. Obviously, the more people that you can, that follow along, the easier it is for others to find what it is that we are sharing with the world. So please jump on, follow if you've liked what you've heard, because we have so many good things in store for you. So thank you again, Prue. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks.